What up, Oak Life? Welcome back to another Roots and Branches. Bam with Chris and Greg. Greg and Chris, we back at it again. We're gonna be talking about evil. See you when we get back.
Yeah, look, I get crazy when the mic round. No sense of getting hyped now. But
Yo, so yeah, I mean that's not enough of a evil. Like, what is evil? So I'm gonna give you a little background to the conversation, how we started this, talking about this. So basically, Roots and Branches has always been just a touch point during the week where we Chris and Greg and Chris, Craig can talk about concepts or a little extra to the Sunday morning. Sunday morning has its own purpose, and sometimes conversations expand beyond that purpose, or sometimes there's things we should say or couldn't say or didn't have enough time to expound upon. So Roots and Branches are kind of catch-all for that, like runneth over of conversational topics. So this week we were talking, just kind of spitballing around the ideas of peace, and then that transition to other topics. And then I was talking about kids and how they, you don't have to teach a kid to be bad. They like inherently got some rah sis boom ba in them, if you know what I'm talking about. And then that sparked this conversation of original sin and people being inherently evil. So that's what we're talking about today. Anything that I missed, Chris?
Nope. Yeah, that's what we're talking about.
That's what we're talking about. That's what we're talking about. Yeah. So Chris, right now, for all the marbles, are we inherently evil?
Hell no. No, it's a serious, actually, it's a big conversation in Christianity because the Reformed teaching, Calvinism, teaches the doctrine of total depravity, that humans are born fundamentally flawed by sin. And that is kind of a weird, well, I don't ever want to disparage people's faith, but I do like pulling out unhealthy theology. And I think the fruit of that theology over time has shifted us from seeing people with, I think, a better term, with the image of God, with the Imago Dei, it's taken us away from seeing the divine in people to then seeing them as like flawed and broken and sinful fundamentally. And so part of the reason it came up with kids is because like there are schools of thought that would say kids as they are have depravity within them, that they are like have original sin. And Greg and I were kind of talking about like, are kids innocent? Are they or are they not? And I fully think that kids are like, we're talking about our own kids here, especially, like there's just an innocence to them. And I think it's a divine innocence, and I think it's real. And so when we start to see ourselves and others as like the fundamental baseline thing that way, I think it can become problematic. And I also think it's not biblically or theologically sound at the end of the day. So want to do a little Bible study for the first time on a Roots and Branches?
Dude, I mean, why not?
Let's see. And if you're jumping in and you want to talk about anything or ask a question about, are people evil? What is evil? That kind of thing, go for it. Or if you have any sort of comment, you just want to say what's up, go for it. So want to read this? This is one of the passages where people get the idea of original sin, which I think actually misses the deeper message of this passage. But want to read this one, Greg?
I'll do 12 and 13. You do 15?
Okay, I'll get the good one.
You get the good one, 50. All right, I got the first half. So starting with Romans 5:12. Therefore, just as sin entered the world through one man, and death through sin, and in this way death came to all people because all sinned. To be sure, sin was in the world before the law was given, but sin is not charged against anyone's account where there is no law. Nevertheless, death reigned from the time of Adam to the time of Moses, even over those who did not sin by breaking a command, as did Adam, who is a pattern of the one to come.
But the gift is not like the trespass. For if the many died by the trespass of one man, how much more did God's grace and the gift that came by the grace of the one man, Jesus Christ, overflow to the many. Nor can the gift of God be compared with the result of one man's sin. The judgment followed one sin and brought condemnation, but the gift followed many trespasses and brought justification. For if by the trespass of the one man death reigned through that one man, how much more will those who receive God's abundant provision of grace and the gift of righteousness reign in life through the one man, Jesus Christ?
Nice.
Thoughts, reactions initially? What stands out to you there?
What does this all mean? What is this all saying is the first initial thought. Second thought is there's a comparison between oh, what up, Jody Stoffel? That's what's up. I see you, Mom. There's this comparison between Adam as the one man and then Jesus as the one man. So it's this contrast. Adam messed up, brought sin, and all suffered. Jesus came through sacrifice, brought grace, and all are rewarded and forgiven with the invitation of Christ's salvation. So that's what it seems like it's setting up.
Yeah. And I think what like the pattern that Paul in this letter is describing is like this one person did something and now we all inherited this stuff. And that's where like the doctrine of original sin comes from. And so we're all messed up, like something's off in the wiring and we need grace and all that stuff. But what I think you miss when you just stop there is what he goes on to say, like, yeah, but what Jesus did is even more profound. And like, if this one action of the archetypal Adam and Eve story, like if that changed things, this is some sort of truth about our origins. How much more is this truth around God's presence coming into our world and redeeming all of us? It overflows the trespass or the initial error, which is actually, this is somewhat controversial, but a great, I think, passage that's not really about original sin. I think it's actually about universal salvation. Like that, what Paul's saying, what he's implying here is that through Jesus, the gift is so abundant that it rescues all, it saves all. So, how might those two worldviews, like focusing on one rather than the other, or focusing on one and missing the other, like how might that get us off balance or off kilter? Like what are the dangers there, do you think?
Oh man, there's a ton. I mean, one argument is that a definition of sin is evil or bad. Another is that it's just falling short. And whenever we have this perspective that is fundamental to our view of life that falls short of like a full broadened perspective, the dangers is harm against others or ourselves. For example, if we look at this and we say, okay, Adam brought sin, so therefore there's original sin. We all suck. Then we're always gonna look at people as like at the root of their being, it's evil, it's bad, it's wrong. So that whatever their actions are, it's probably because deep down they're really evil. So you're gonna start looking for the evil in their behavior, in their actions. You start vilifying people, and then like what type of good is that, right? So what is the definition of sin, Facebook user? So this is the question. So I think this question is to you, Chris. What is the definition of sin?
Nice ping pong.
That's a good question. It's a great question.
Biblically, New Testament, it comes from the word hamartia, some pronunciation of that. And the Greek there implies it's an archery term. It's missing the mark. And so there's this ideal of humanity and we've fallen short. We've like missed it. And so the type of like interpretation we're talking about where you just focus on like the original sin piece, like that you have this fundamental flaw in you, I think misses it completely. I think that view of sin is sinful in its original definition. And it focuses on the individual. It makes it all about like in American Christianity, it makes it all about like not having sex before marriage, not doing drugs, living a pious life with like your actions. And it's a lot about behavior management and doing the right things rather than an internal posture of openness to God's grace, which I think is like that's what healthy spirituality invites you to. Healthy religion, and as far as Christianity, and so because it becomes really individualistic on like, am I doing this thing or not doing this thing? Am I in sin or not in sin? We miss what I think is the broader call as people of faith, as Jesus followers, to fight the powers and principalities. So another piece, if you start seeing everybody as fundamentally flawed and sinful, you start to see people as potentially the enemy. And Paul says profoundly that our battle is not against flesh and blood. It's not against people, but it's against powers and principalities, systems, values that corrupt, that oppress, that bring injustice. And so I've heard somebody say that sin is culpable disturbance of shalom. That when we are bringing the world out of balance, when we're bringing people out of like whole relationship with themselves or with others, out of like a loving connection to the planet, to God, and we're culpable and choosing to do that, that's where there's like stuff to work through. But it's about these like communal, broader things rather than just individual. So I don't know if that answers the question, but I see sin as, when we're missing the mark, when we're just not living, we're not walking the path of love. We're choosing, especially intentionally, but often unintentionally, something that is bringing harm to others or self or the planet. And so the idea, this is where that question of like, if you lean too far one way or the other on some of these interpretations, you'll miss it. Because I don't think that we should toss out sin completely, like as like a concept. I actually think it's a very useful term to consider with like all the problems in our world. Like we as people have missed the mark. I just like that terminology better because it like implies like everybody misses the mark. And there's not something to be shameful there, like to like tell people they're evil, but it's like, yeah, we just missed it. And so I actually think it's a conversation that opens us up to change, which is the goal. So here's a question. What do you think are some of the sins we as people need to work through?
Well, that's good. It's a good question. And I think it's like this Kanye West line comes to mind. It's like old folks pissing because it all depends. You know what I mean? So shout out to you if you get that. Also, shout out to Maeva. That is the Facebook user. I need an Oak Life glossary for reference. We'll work on that. We'll work on that, Facebook user, potentially Maeva. So to your question, what are some of the things? The reason why I like the terminology of missing the mark versus falling short is falling short means that like you went one direction and you have to elevate yourself up to a standard. But missing the mark, if you think of a bullseye, I love the naming of it being an archery term, is that it's the center. You can miss the mark in any direction. So you could be too much in any direction, whether that's whatever concept, too healthy, not too healthy. You could be, you can work too hard or you can work too little. You can help people too much. You can help people too little. Like you can miss the mark in a lot of different directions. So some of the ways I think if I was to, rather than list them all out, I would say it would be doing things to an excessive amount or to an excessive extent or not doing things at all. So that would just be the thing. It could be as little as or common as poor nutritional habits, right? Like, because if, for example, I'll just use myself, I know that if I don't have good nourishment, then my energy is low. When my energy and my resources are low, my irritability goes high. When my irritability is high, I'm not fun to be around. And then I'm not loving people and I'm not treating people with the respect and dignity they deserve. So it's like I'm falling short or missing the mark rather in my call. So that can be deemed a sin. Sin doesn't have to always be this like evil, abusive, like very overarching type concept. It's like you said, just missing the mark. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think like, I like the imagery you use there because it's like something more about balance and health. And like, I would say like walking in love, like, and when you're erring too much, like you can try to love too hard and then smother somebody, or it becomes a codependent thing. Like, so you're missing the mark by aiming too high. There's the intentional miss. So having that kind of balance, which is probably different for each of us, but it's a different framework because it's more about like, the question isn't, is this thing right or wrong? It's what does it mean for me to walk the path of love? Which I think in the end is a higher call than the simple like categories of right and wrong. Jesus had these discussions with like people, like they would come to him and be like, who sinned? Like, why is this person, like they thought some physical ailments could be a consequence of somebody's sin or past sin from your parents or something. They asked Jesus, like, who sinned here? Was it this person or was it his parents or what happened? And Jesus is like, no, you're looking at it all wrong. What goes into the mouth is not the thing that does it. It's what comes out, like meaning it's your heart. And so we want to focus on externals. Like, I think things like smoking weed or watching rated R movies, like we're drawn to those things because they're easier to control and they're obvious, but where your heart lies is more of a journey than like a categorical right or wrong answer. Yeah. So lots of stuff there. And I think overall in American Christianity, by focusing on individual sins, we've missed communal, societal, species-wide issues. And we don't know how to deal with them together. Like, I think primarily here about like the environment, like our connection to the creation that God has given us is in many ways what I would say is sinful. Like we've missed it. We have not taken care of it. We've not stewarded it. We've exploited it and consumed it. And as a consequence, we will have to deal with this. Yeah. So it's kind of a lot of this we haven't totally planned, but talking about evil, talking about sin, I think it should be like, this is going to sound weird, but it should be kind of an exciting conversation rather than a heavy, daunting conversation, because it is an opportunity to grow and change and let things out and all that. So how do we, when there's sin, what do we do?
I love that you asked that question. Before you do, I'm pretty sure Maeva. So sin is missing the mark. We should focus on walking in love. Short answer, yes. Follow-up question is, what does walking in love look like in your life? Because if sin is different depending on our life, walking in love, that path will also look different depending on where we are. Sin and love are very interesting words as far as our English language is concerned. So yeah, definitely good stuff to reflect on. You said, what should we do with sin? This is my allegorical example to help me understand sin. So I'm gonna bounce this off you. Let me know what you think. Sin is comparable to gravity. Gravity is a force that is constantly pulling you down. Now, one thing we can do is we can look at it as this inherently evil thing that is always working against us. Or what we can look at is how we've used and understood gravity to work against it for our betterment. So, for example, concepts like balance, concepts like resistance training when using gravity, body weight exercises, even understanding gravity to the point where it's like, okay, said things can defy gravity, such as flight and all of these concepts. The more we understand it, because we don't look at gravity as something that's evil, I wonder if we could look at sin as something that, like gravity, if we understand the force and the energy that'll pull us from the mark, if we understand how it impacts our body, our spirit, our mind, our emotions, we can possibly develop ways to use that force to develop ourselves. I think that a lot of ways Scripture talks about struggle, and struggle enduring produces this growth in our person. struggle could be the process of working against sin as this force. And then it loses its daunting scariness. If it's like, oh, this is just a force that like, it's just a part of life and I'm going to work against this. I'm going to master this thing and I'm going to continue shooting my bow and getting closer and closer to the center. Anyway, so the short answer is, how do we look at it? We look at it as something that's a part of life that is for our betterment if we better understand it.
Yeah. I like that I like the way you said it just there. It's a part, we have a tendency to miss the mark. And it's just a thing that we do. I like that piece. I want to push on the gravity piece because I think a better analogy for gravity would be love.
By the way, I just want you to know that gravity is a good allegory. Just wanted to throw that out there. So continue.
But they haven't heard this one yet, so this might be even better. That love is the thing that is always raining down on us, holding us, keeping us. And so when we avoid that, or we pretend that it's not there, or act against it in some way, like against this thing that is always there, that's really the underlying force behind it all, that's where we slip up and trip up, and or we use it for negative purposes. Like you throw a rock at somebody, like you're using this force to hurt somebody. Like when we I just like for me, I actually don't think we should focus on sin all that much. Like I don't think and so when you make sin gravity, this thing that's like everywhere all the time, keeping us, holding us, keeping us from floating off into space forever, I think that gives sin too much credit. Like I think the main story, which is what Paul's saying, is like the love piece. That's the story. Like it's not original sin. You were created originally in the image of God. Like good. Like that's the first word. That's the way we should see one another. God's love is the thing. And then when we miss it, like when we don't see it, when we forget about it, when we choose to go against that flow, I think that's where, and it's not a perfect analogy, but yeah. I don't know if I won you over. You got a little.
Nah, didn't win me over, man. I like the shift towards putting our focus on something more positive, but then I think that limits the potential of love, because I think love is even like gravity is like no one thinks about gravity. Like think about it. When is the last time that you actually focused on gravity? Like you've gotten to a point where like white noise, it's no longer something that you are consciously like actively cognitive about. And I think sin in the same way should be a thing that we like understand in like a foundational level so that we can never have to worry about it again. Right. Whereas love should always be on the forefront of our thoughts.
But it's not. I think in that analogy, love is more like God's love in particular is something that I think is like coming at us in high def, loud volume, always. Like that is creation itself as an expression of God's love, just like bursting out energy all the time. I think that's the white noise. That's the thing we take for granted. We don't think about gravity in the same way. I actually think we think about sin way more. Like we're constantly down to call people out, and
we do. So again, when was the last time you thought about gravity?
Right now.
Exactly. If someone brings it up, but that's my point, is that you are saying people should pay more attention to love, and we don't. We miss it. You're talking about what should happen. I'm talking about what is currently happening. Currently, no one is talking about gravity because we've moved past it. And in the same way, that's what we should be treating sin like. Like we've moved past sin. We're not talking about this is how to, appear righteous in the eyes of other people. Like, no.
I think we do talk about sin
in the conversation, and it shouldn't be anymore. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. It's good. It's interesting.
I like this.
Yeah, I don't know if we'll solve it. Is love or sin more like gravity? We'll leave it out there for the community. But I saw a question. How should we hold ourselves and each other accountable. This would be a fun one to riff out on briefly, because I think we've talked about this a lot.
Yeah.
Because even within church, it's like what does that mean? And I'll tip my cards. I think the ways those ideas are churchly held, I probably disagree with. Like, I don't think it's a church's job to to police people's behavior. I think calling out systemic injustice, absolutely. And often when there are individual issues, I think that happens within the context of relationship and loving space. So an example would be if somebody in my sphere is harming themselves or others. Like, I think loving conversations in relationship are way better than like public declarations against somebody. So if I do something wrong and Greg be like, yo, dude, you said that thing and you've been doing that a lot, like, it kind of bums me out or something. Like, I will receive that because Greg is my brother and I know he loves me and I love him. And I think generally I lean towards those sorts of like relational conversations that happen over time, even. And often people, for them to be held accountable, they have to come to a conclusion for themselves, which means you don't tell them where they're wrong. You invite them on a journey or become friends with them and create space for them to kind of come to terms with that. So that means a lot of asking questions and listening, like, which sounds counterintuitive when you want to hold somebody accountable. But in my experience, it actually is more transformative because people feel safe, they feel heard, they feel seen, and then they realize things on their own. That said, there's definitely times where like culture or leaders or various things go beyond a certain thing, and there should be some public declaration. But I think that's almost always against systems and powers and those sorts of things. So at Oak Life, it'd be like calling out the American church, repenting for being too rigid in our theology and keeping women from leading or excluding people based on their orientation from communion with God and those sorts of things. So calling that out, I think is, or calling it in is maybe the more grace-filled way of saying it. But what do you think, Greg? How do you hold people, ourselves and others, accountable?
I agree with you 100% on that. I think it's two separate conversations. I think the self and others, because how you hold others accountable, I agree with you 100%. And I would say that your responsibility to hold someone accountable is dependent upon your relationship with said person. If you have no relationship with said person and they're not causing like immediate harm to someone, like palpable, like I'm smacking somebody up, right? You have no responsibility to intervene and hold them accountable to it. An example that I've looked to in regards to like our call to hold one another accountable. I'm pretty sure it's in Ephesians. Could be wrong, but there's a scene where Paul and Peter are hanging out, and Peter is talking one way with some new disciples, and then sees like some high-ranking Jewish folks come through, and he changes his tone, and he's like speaking in a way to like appease these new people that have come. And he's acting fake, essentially. So Paul calls him out on it. He's like, hey, dude, you can't shift how you are in front of people to preserve how you look in their eyes, especially when you have these younger individuals looking up to you. You're going to cause harm in their understanding of what our roles and our responsibilities are. And I think that, to me, that was a really good example. It's like, okay, Paul and Peter have a relationship. They clearly know how to communicate. They clearly know what their role is in each other's lives. So when he saw that, he was like, hey, you can't be fake, man. Like, don't do that. And I think that's like a prime example. Like, if you see something and you know the person, so you know, okay, they're acting out of character, like, because you've spent that time, you had the blood, sweat, and tears with them. Like, you could do that. Call them out on it in love. Like, hey, I want what's best for you. I want what's best for what you want in regards to, these individuals watching you. Like, do that. Mm-hmm. The conversation about how do you keep yourself accountable? man, when we figure that out, I think the best thing is to put people in your lives to help you do that. There's this proverb, I don't know, it's not biblical, but it says that a monk cannot shave his own head. Basically saying that it's not our responsibilities to take care of ourselves completely. That's why we need each other. It is not good for people to be alone. So you put people in your lives to help you do that. That's what I would say.
Well said. Got some.
What
Mom,
up?
asking a question too. God called us to be the salt and light too of the world, right? And I think that's true. I think what the salt does is it brings out the flavor, brings out the goodness. The light shines, what I would say, reflect God's light, bringing out the image of God within others. So I think it's almost like both of those teachings of Jesus are, I think, highlighting the good, like drawing people towards the good rather than shaming them about the bad, which is like a better approach, I think, around this conversation around sin. Like, let's see where the good is, where people already reflect God's beauty and goodness, and let's draw that out and celebrate that, rather than looking for the pieces that don't have as much flavor or that like went bad. It's focusing and moving people towards the beauty and the good and inviting them to that rather than shaming them about where they've missed the mark.
Right. Which is really good because that is the second half. Mm-hmm. That's the focus shift from 12 and 13 to 15 through 17. It's like we're not looking at people as this inherently evil thing, because in one conversation, it's people are inherently evil. In a 2020 conversation, then you're limiting people to the category, their identity categories. It's like, oh, you are only this, and this. So because of that, there's no worth, there's no value to your opinion. Your experience means nothing to me. And I'm going to discard you because you are worthless at this point. And that's very sad. That is a very sad way to look at one another in this life. Are the realities of the systems like real? The implications of people's lives and histories and experience? Yes. But to just say a person is only this, it's the same as saying a person is only evil. When we extend that grace and develop those one-on-one relationships, man, that's the good stuff, which goes back full circle to, like, I was reading some stuff around kids being fussy, and it says that, oh, at this age, they're fussy. And I'm like, okay. I did more research, and it said that basically as kids start to understand the world around them, because they're starting to see and understand what they like and what they don't like, they have natural responses. And when you don't like something, you're going to have a natural response. And since it's brand new, you haven't learned how to like deal with said emotion. So that might come out in a certain way. And since you can't talk, since you can't communicate, you don't have full like motor skills of your body parts yet, what's going to happen? You'll get fussy. That totally makes sense. It's not because kids are inherently evil. It's like, oh, they're crying because they're evil, or they're mad because they're evil, or they're hitting you in the face because they're evil. It's like, it's not evil. They're learning how to operate in the world. And when you take that time to do that research, like, you start to see things differently. You don't fall short. You keep learning, you keep growing, you keep developing those relationships. You just start to see things more clear. But yeah, that's all I got, man.
It's good. I'll leave it with one last thing. Thinking this conversation altogether. What are you laughing at?
I said we're not inherently evil. Cain killed his brother. Inherently evil.
I think, well, and it goes to that story too a little bit. Jesus is teaching on the log and the eye and the speck and all that. Like, with all these things, there's an invitation to look here way before we look out there, and in grace, like noticing where we can improve and get better and heal. And if we all did that, rather than like pointing out other people's stuff and seeing them as those things, there'd be a way for us to change. And then doing that together, like you're saying, having other people who can shave your head for you, like it can't get that spot right there. Like, can somebody else see that? in love, moving us forward towards reflecting God's love more.
Yep.
So, all right, I think we solved sin and evil.
We did.
You're welcome, world.
That'll be $2.95. If you can just send that to Oak Life Church at. No, I'm just playing.
Yeah.
All right, so that's it. So we're gonna go and we're gonna indulge in non-sinful activities. Ain't that right, my man?
No promises. Thanks everyone for engaging.
We love you. Continue to live, love, fight, and follow as Jesus did and does. We will catch you next time. Peace.
Talk to him. That's it.